All right. So first, I would like to introduce a very special guest. Anushka Saxena has come to us from Sammamish area with a passion for land acknowledgements, and she'll tell you a bit about that and begin our gathering today with a land acknowledgement. Anushka?
Yes, thank you so much, Elise. Hi, everyone. My name is Anushka, and as she mentioned, I'm a high schooler in Sammamish, and I use she, her pronouns. And today I will be talking to all of you a little bit more about the importance of land acknowledgements and how you all can be an ally and supporter of Native communities. So it is vital that we do land acknowledgements because we are all living on the ancestral homelands of Indigenous people who have lived and worked here for tens of thousands of years since time immemorial. Their communities have endured great pain as a result of colonialism and cultural genocide, but their voices ring out loud and clear today saying that they are still here and thriving. For this reason, it is vital that we do our part to recognize that we are living on their tribal land and raise awareness about their history and culture. You can learn a little bit more about the tribes whose land you live on through the link that I have just shared in the chat. And as a disclaimer, this is not completely accurate, so please make sure to visit the actual official websites of the tribes to get the traditional boundaries. But although we are meeting online today from all across the state of Washington, I would like to take this moment to acknowledge that we live on the traditional homelands of a variety of tribes, including all of the 29 federally recognized tribes across Washington state, and also tribes such as the Duwamish that are working to regain their recognition after being denied their treaty rights due to broken promises. I encourage all of you to put your own land acknowledgements into the chat. And for example, I would say something like that I live on the ancestral homelands of the Duwamish and Snoqualmie people, and that I respect and honor that they have lived and worked here for tens of thousands of years. And finally, I would like to share that I'm a high schooler and I'm working on incorporating land acknowledgements into schools because it's extremely important that we educate and inform our youth and children about the true history of America. For this reason, I have created a petition to catch the attention of decision makers, and I hope to pass a law about this in the near future that will require all schools to teach Native history and incorporate land acknowledgements. So I really appreciate your support in this cause, and if you can please sign the petition and share it, that would mean so much to me. I have also created a website with more information and ideas for how you can support Native communities, for example, buying Native art, supporting Native-led businesses. So I would appreciate it if you can check it out. And I will put the link in the chat as well. And you can also connect with me there because I would love to talk to you all and hear your ideas as well. So thank you so much for listening, and please continue to share your land acknowledgements in the chat. Back to Elise.
So much, Anushka. I hope everyone will sign her petition. She is inspiring to all of us and has already become a leader on these issues and with our Interfaith Network for Indigenous Communities. So thank you so much for taking the time and for all you do, for inspiring us. Next, I'd like to welcome Pastor Priscilla Austin, who's the pastor of Emmanuel Church in Seattle. You may have seen Pastor Priscilla speak at our annual dinner, but she's also engaged in so many facets of our work, and we're just delighted that you registered, took the time out of a busy Pentecost day to be with us. Welcome, Priscilla.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm going to share with you a prayer written or curated by Claudio Carvalles in a text called Liturgies from Below, praying with people from the ends of the world. This is a prayer for peace and justice. God of justice and peace, we are striving for justice and peace. Why have the powerful people taken away all of our belongings? We are struggling, oppressed by rich government. We are tired, Lord. Our struggles were ignored by the church, the government, and by the people. Free us and liberate us. Amen.
Lauren, we'll introduce the next portion. Welcome, Lauren, our Eastern Washington Regional Organizer from Spokane.
Hey everybody, it's so great to be here with you today. Now we're going to have a chance to meet in regional breakout rooms, which I'm particularly excited about because I know through my work in Eastern Washington that sometimes we have specific focuses in our regions that aren't necessarily focused on statewide. So this is just an opportunity for you all to connect with people who are actually nearby you in the state and to talk about some priorities. So I'm putting this in the chat, but I'd love for you to all take some time to introduce yourselves, share about your faith community if applicable, and where you live. And then some questions to consider are like, what's one thing fans should know about in your region? And as I mentioned before, what might be important there that isn't necessarily focused on statewide. That would be really interesting for us to know and hear about. And what's something that you're looking forward to in the year ahead in your region? So I'm placing that in the chat, and then we can go to breakout rooms.
Welcome back. If you can, I know that was fast, but I hope you got to at least greet each other. If everyone could put themselves on mute now, we invite you to share some of your thoughts in the chat. Lauren, did you want to say more about that?
No, yeah, I was just going to put in the chat our email address, the fan email. If any of you would like to email in and share what you discussed in your regional breakout groups, and if there's anything specifically that you think you would really like us to know, we'd love to hear, or you can put it in the chat.
Thanks, Lauren. So now if everyone can mute themselves, we'll turn it over to Paul to talk about what happened in this session and more, and we'll have some Q&A to follow that. So
great. Thanks, Elise. So I will try and go through this very quickly, and sorry if I miss your favorite bill that was passed in the legislative session, but we will bring up the I think we'll bring up the ledge outcome. It's on the FAN website, but this past legislative session was I always hate to use the word historic, but if there was a session that was, thanks Tara for bringing that up. This is on the FAN website. Please share it with your faith community if you can. It would be wonderful, even just some excerpts of what I share. So as you know, we've been in the COVID era for more than a year. This session was almost completely remote. There were a handful of House members and a handful of Senate members on the floor when bills would come for debate, amendment, and passage. But other than that, all committee hearings were remote. No lobbyists, very few were permitted on campus. The campus had the fencing around it, as in our nation's capital, because of what happened on January 6th and more. And so I'm going to run down by issue area. FAN, the last couple of sessions, have had 6 policy areas or buckets. The first one is a combination of taxation, tax reform bills, poverty, budget, and food and hunger issues. So that's quite a combination just in one bucket alone. I'm going to just highlight that one of the things that made this session historic was the first significant tax reform bill to reverse our upside down tax structure, which is the most regressive in the country. You all know that, but we passed the capital gains tax, and of course it has been contested, is in the process of being contested in Douglas County Superior Court. That public arguments will probably be heard either later this summer or in the fall. And you can just read about it there, the short description of it. Secondly, the Working Families Tax Credit was something that was passed sessions ago, 7-8 sessions ago, if not more, parallels, but now it's the statute was updated, as well as added in the undocumented workers in our state, which is very, very significant. And this parallels the EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit at the federal level. Washington's the only state of about 20-25 that have a state tax credit for working families. That is a state that does not have a state income tax, but our Department of Revenue will be working on making sure, as well as the coalition that El Paso that FAN was a part of, work to make sure that we get all eligible households enrolled in this important program. Tara, if you could just scroll up just a little bit more. The other one I wanted to touch on this section is the eliminating the school lunch copay. FAN has worked on this food, hunger, poverty issue for years. And now this is the first time that we got completely K through 12 in our public schools, the lunch copay eliminated. So it's basically, in essence, a free lunch for all those that are eligible, K through 12, all 12 grades. Let's move quickly to the next section, which is criminal justice. Thanks, Tara. So I'm just going to just very briefly just do the first 4 bills. If I had to do a time crunch of where I spent most of my lobbying hours for all of you for Faith Action Network, it would be in these first 4 bills. And there were many more. The governor signed a package of 12 bills last Tuesday that I was privileged to be a part of in Tacoma. So you've got 1310, House Bill 1310, which establishes de-escalation as a statewide standard and use of force as a last resort for law enforcement. We'll see, like any bill, how this gets implemented and the effect that it will have. The second bill was a governor-sponsored bill establishing a statewide office of independent investigations, so that when a homicide happens, it is not investigated by police, but by the state office. And it will take at least a year to get this office up and running. Thirdly, police tactics prohibitions and restrictions. So prohibitions in terms of chokeholds and neck restraints. Also in terms of no-knock warrants. Restrictions come in how tear gas is used in our state now, and how vehicular pursuits happen by law enforcement. Lastly, decertification. Our standards for law enforcement for certifying, decertifying, this one deals particularly with decertifying, have been horrible. We put stronger teeth in this. Again, we will see what the outcomes will be on this. And also, very significantly, the Criminal Justice Training Commission, the commission itself, that is the law enforcement training site down in Burien. The commission itself has been heavily law enforcement. So now it is at least 50-50 community and law enforcement. Let's go to the next one, Tara. So housing and homelessness. I just want to cite 2 bills here. The Just Cause bill, which was House Bill 1236 by Nicole Macri in Seattle. Now landlords will have to have a just cause for evicting somebody, and it'll have to be in writing. And last year we passed the time frame around it. So this was a hard-fought bill, as well as the renter right to counsel. Now there'll be access for legal counsel before someone gets evicted. And so we are, and after they're evicted, both cases, this is primarily to try and prevent evictions by having legal counsel paid for by your state tax dollars. And we're really, Senator Kudower worked really hard. She's from the Bellevue area to get that passed. Let's go to the next section, which was the environment. Big gains here, the Clean Fuel Standard bill that the environmental community, that Earth Ministry is a significant part of, and FAN is also part of it. This bill has been tried for several sessions. It took hours upon hours to get passed in the House and the Senate this session. We're really glad to see that the fuels that we use will produce less greenhouse gas emissions. And secondly, I just want to do 2 here because time is running out. The HEAL Act, which is the 2.0. Last year, the HEAL Act was introduced and passed just as a concept, as now this is being applied to the state agencies. So we are really glad to see this, particularly in terms of racial equity. If there was another reason that this session was historic, it was because of the racial equity impacts that our leadership in the House and the Senate took into consideration of the bills, and this is one of them. And then the last two sections in terms of immigration and our First Nations people, I just want to highlight the two immigration bills, which is the private detention bill. I just want to do one because we got to get to Congress yet. Two is the private detention bill. So the idea here is to try and close down the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma. Statutorily, the way the language reads in that bill is it will close by the end of the contract that GEO has, and that's in about 3 years. They just filed, I believe, last week, and we were not surprised by that one bit. In terms of First Nations, you all, I think, are probably aware of that each state has 2 statues in the Capitol, in our United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. The Billy Frank statue will replace the Marcus Whitman statue. So that is a big racial equity piece that should not be ignored. And last but not least, in terms of healthcare and mental health, I just want to assure the one thing here is, actually two I want to list. The Universal Healthcare Commission, this is another 2.0 bill, meaning that last year the study was enacted, and now this year, significantly, this establishes a permanent commission to help the state, our state, move into universal healthcare coverage. And then last but not least, the dental therapy bill. This is particularly of importance to how tribes are doing it and to enhance it in dental care in our tribal areas. We were not able to pass the bill once again, but because of the forces against us, the lobbying forces, but we got it into the, as an amendment, as a proviso into the budget. So we're glad to get that in there. I'll just transfer to, brings us back to, thanks, Tara, to Congress, a few issues there, and then we'll just open it up for Q&A and put your questions in the chat room if you haven't already. We'll monitor that. In Congress, though FAN does not publish or adopt a formal congressional agenda, we have for years had a watch list, and issues that we're monitoring and that we send out through our e-news and e-alert during the state legislative interim time. So probably the two most important bills that we're watching right now and advocating for is the Reparations Study Commission bill. Been around for 4 decades, been around too long. And the difficulty in all these bills will, as we all know, will come with the United States Senate, which is 50-50. The Democrats have majority only because we have a new president in office, and the president of the Senate, of course, is always the vice president presiding over the Senate. The other significant racial justice bill before the United States Senate right now as we speak and being negotiated on is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And again, this is hotly contested, so urge our 2 U.S. senators who are very supportive of this, but the qualified immunity issue for law enforcement, I would be very surprised if it gets into the bill. It did not get into the bill as it passed the House. Many advocates in DC and around the country were deeply disappointed about that, but we continue to advocate for that to be in the bill's final language. The refugee admissions cap, finally the Biden administration came around on that to greatly increase the number for the rest of this fiscal year through the end of September. And I believe it's at 16,500. We're hoping that the next federal fiscal year, starting in October 1st of this year, will go to 25,000, if not more, to get us back up to where we used to be before the Trump administration took office over 4 years ago. We also are watching the VAWA. Many of you are very supportive of that bill in terms of domestic violence. The Violence Against Women Act and we look for that reauthorization. It's passed the House, and once again, it's before the Senate. So the funding levels there will be very, very important. And I could go on, but I think I'm going to push pause and see what questions we've got. And if you do have questions, you can use the raise hand symbol in the your reaction box. And so I'm just going to go from the bottom up, unless staff, you direct me otherwise. Jean Mendoza from Central Washington asked FAN to formally protest governor's line item veto of sections of the climate bill that we require. Yep, it was horrible. Thank you for putting that in there, Jean. Both the Climate Commitment Act from Senator Carlisle and the Clean Fuel Standard bill that I mentioned, he vetoed sections on, and now both of those bills are being contested by leaders in his own party in the court system. I don't know, I have any idea why there wasn't greater consultation between the leaders of the legislature and the governor's office before it went to his desk. But a part of that was what Jean is mentioning here, is improving the consultation with the tribes in terms of climate reduction. I don't understand, this is from Jean Harris. I don't understand why the auto dealers are excused from capital gains. Can you explain that reasoning? Yeah, Jean, unfortunately, it's called compromise in the halls of power. There were many, many exemptions that were added to the capital gains bill. Those were not easy pills for us, to say it that way, to swallow. But I think the main thing is that you got to understand, I always used to say, you know, in terms of my role in Olympia and others like me, we hardly compare to some of the well-heeled lobbying interests in Washington State, and the auto dealers are one of those. And so when it really comes to bear, you'll see things like this happen. But we were still glad to be able to get the 7% rate kept at that rate, and also the exemption level of $250,000 for those that aren't exempted. And it was quite a battle, quite a fight. If any of you watched any of the proceedings from the floor, you'll understand what I'm saying. Amendment after amendment, hour after hour, by the other side of the aisle, fighting for this not to take place. And so we're still happy that the bill passed. Any other, I don't see anything else in the chat room unless I'm missing it. Are there, I don't have my full view up to see if there's,
Paul, there's a few others, definitely.
in the chat room, or hands raised?
Sandy Goodwick says knowledgeable funding for mental health that actually is representative of what leaders with lived experience recommend. So I think that's a recommendation we'll include. Cinda asks, what about cash bail? Are we working to eliminate cash bail that greatly affects BIPOC communities?
That issue did not come up last session. Thank you for that, Cinda. It is a very significant racial equity issue. But we hope, let's put that in our recommendations for next session. And I know it was worked on. If it was worked on this session, I did not hear about it in the criminal justice coalitions that I represent FAN at, which is about 2 or 3. So I don't think it came up this session, but and I'm a bit surprised. So I don't know. I'm not in the lead on that issue, so I'm not sure why that didn't come up. Bob Cooper would. Bob's been a long time criminal justice lobbyist in Olympia. And Paul, do you have any idea whether Inslee will extend the eviction moratorium? That's a good question from Sally Kinney. That will bring forth a tsunami of homelessness. Yes. One, in terms of Inslee, I don't know. I don't know. My suspicion is that he won't, but I think that I know at the local level, specifically at Martin Luther King County level, there is now an increased level of homelessness advocates like yourself, Sally, and others that are working on that issue. I think the Housing Alliance, though took a couple-week break from the state session, is beginning to mobilize on that as well, to make sure that that we get more voices raised on this at the state level, but also working at the local level to help prevent evictions after July 1st. So good question. My sense is that the governor feels, and there has been a lot that has been done, several eviction extensions, a lot of funding, the 2 housing bills I mentioned, and there were others that I didn't mention, the recording fee bill that will go to help renovate and build more affordable housing. But it's unfortunate that the chasm between housed and unhoused is so great in our state and our nation that it just, the bleeding, sorry to use that word, just continues, and we do need to try and extend that moratorium. Since yeah.
One of the first questions asked was Laura Rathbone. How does the governor's veto this week of the transportation bill affect the clean fuels and climate solutions bills?
I don't think there's a the vetoes of those 2 bills. My understanding is that there is no connection between that, but his vetoes are, as I mentioned before, Laura, are being hotly contested in court, and he has really angered a lot of people, a lot of leaders in his own party, which was disappointing to see. But that doesn't mean that the other parts of the bills will not go through. And the transportation budget, the short-term transportation budget was adopted, the longer term was not. And our transportation infrastructure system, just like the rest of the country, is in a horrible situation. And Senator Hobbs, who lives here along with me in Snohomish County, stated that several times during this session, that it was kind of baling wire that kind of has kept the transportation baseline needs, and not even that is being met in terms of our state's transportation needs. So other questions I'm looking, what is the prognosis for addressing gun access and gun violence? Jeff, thanks for that question, Jeff Berner. So we passed a significant bill that's on the outcomes list that I didn't mention. Senator Kuderer passed that bill, and basically it has to do with openly carry of weapons at public demonstrations and at demonstrations specifically at our state capitol. That will no longer be allowed. There is a distance established in the language of the bill. That was hotly contested. I was privileged to be able to testify on that bill, and maybe perhaps some of you on this on the Zoom screen were as well. But we're able to get that through thanks to Senator Kuderer. Representative Sen from Mercer Island was the House Prime sponsor of it, and we're really glad to see that. I think we're way over time, but as long as we don't mind.
Time for one more question.
Okay.
Laura, well, oh, there they come. There was a question about reducing sales tax now that the capital gains passed. If you have a comment on that.
Yeah, my only comment on that is there was no conversation about that I was aware of during session. I mean, there's always conversation depending on which conversation you're in, right? But specifically, and I hope that I haven't had a chance to even talk to fan staff yet about it much of significance, and that is many of you are aware that there has been, and it's continuing, they just met earlier this week, the tax structure work group. This is a legislative-led work group, and our economic justice work group has been aware of it in years past and sometimes testified at their hearings around the state. They are going to be planning 6 scenarios, and they will be taking those around the state. They're in the process. They've contracted with 1 or 2 organizations to help this process, and this is a Republican and Democratic-led work group, of course. And obviously, the 6 scenarios include a variety such as reducing the sales tax. And those 6 scenarios will be available to the public. I don't know if any of you remember when Ron Sims ran for the United States Senate, he had an EOI has it as well, Economic Opportunity Institute, called a tax calculator. You can get an app for your handheld device, and then you can plug in each of those scenarios, and they will probably have some kind of rating system for individuals to provide input back to the work group.
Well, I think that's it for that portion. If you have other questions, or if Paul has time to just respond in the chat to some of the last ones that came in, thank you. We could go on for hours about just that portion, right? But I do want to shift so we can get to those breakout groups by issue where your voices are heard and shared with fan staff, fan board, all of us. We want to take a few minutes to talk about this vaccine outreach you may have been seeing us do in our e-news recently. We were asked by the Department of Health to be part of a cohort of people working on vaccine outreach, because we know the only way we're going to get through this COVID time is if as many people as possible get vaccinated. And of course, now the vaccines are abundant. We've reached a good percentage, and now it's either people on the fence or it's people who are opposed. And you know as much as you've read in the papers about what that means, but we really want to make sure the vaccines get to out as equitably and protect the communities that are most impacted by COVID. So faith communities have a really important role to play. You are trusted people in your faith communities. If you have a conversation with somebody that attends your congregation, you can have an impact. So this week, or somebody actually, you know, perhaps served by your congregation in a shelter or food bank. This week we have the opportunity to meet with Dr. Umair Shah, who is the new Secretary of Health for Washington State. And he agreed to share this message with you, and we'll say more in a minute.
Hi, my name is Dr. Umair Shah. I'm the Secretary of Health for the great state of Washington. I just want to thank all of our faith leaders throughout the state of Washington for everything you have meant throughout this pandemic to give not just emotional support, but also spiritual support for all of our communities. And this is a critical junction for all of us right now because we are trying to end this pandemic through the use of vaccines. And so I just want you to help us with championing the messages: vaccines work, vaccines are effective, and most importantly, don't hesitate, vaccinate. Whatever we can do together ultimately is going to help us end this pandemic. Thank you.
And Victoria has been doing some great research as a social work intern with us. Victoria, if you can share a few words.
Yeah, so again, I'm Victoria. I'm the UW Practicum student with Faith Action Network. So we got to meet with Dr. Shah, as you saw. One of the main things we discussed was right now the current plan is to have the state open by June 30th, but we would need 70% of people vaccinated in order to reach that herd immunity. So according to the Seattle Times and the Department of Health, currently there's 47.98% of all people who have received one dose, or 59% of people 16 and older. But for fully vaccinated Washingtonians, we're at 39.15% of everyone vaccinated, or 48.78% of 16 and older. So if we really want to open by June 30th, we need to hit 70%. So we're really asking for people to share their stories of getting vaccinated and help encourage neighbors, friends, and family to continue to get vaccinated if you have already been. One of the lowest counts we're seeing is that in rural communities and communities of color, they're having the lowest numbers of vaccinations. So we're really asking people to just share their stories and help try and get everyone vaccinated. And part of our work with FAN is we were able to create a toolkit, and I believe Tara is going to show that next on our FAN website.
So thanks to a lot of Victoria helping me consolidate these. We have a toolkit for vaccines. You can access it through our homepage. If you go to this main slider here, the third picture over will say vaccine equity, and that will take you to this page. And we have resources on COVID-19 in general, statewide, local, and national, and then things specific to vaccines, including a couple different ways to use vaccine finders. And there's also one in 30 different languages if you work with communities that need something other than English. More information on particular communities and why they may be hesitant to use vaccines, and this vaccine in particular. And then just more information that we hope to build out on how to promote vaccine equity, and so all our communities can get vaccinated.
Thanks, Tara, and just extra thanks to Tara for doing all the tech support and tech creation for us today. Really appreciate her creativity. We have an ask for you out of all this, and there are many, many faith communities and faith leaders engaged in this work already. In King County, there is a faith leaders table that some of the people on the call today have joined. We know that faith communities are hosting pop-up clinics. New Beginnings Christian Fellowship in the Kent region has specifically done one to make sure that there is equitable access for Black communities in South King County. St. Mark's Episcopal Cathedral has done pop-up clinics. The Sikh community in Federal Way has done clinics. I know in Spokane that Lauren has been engaged with some faith community clinics. Not everybody can do a clinic, but we are asking you to take back to your faith community from this meeting a commitment to do something about vaccines, promoting vaccines in June. So we're still in May, we still have time. So in June, if you could make a vaccine awareness weekend or Sabbath or educational forum, or find a way to engage with the social services that you host at your faith community. If you would do one thing about preaching, teaching, educating, promoting, making available vaccines, during June, this could take us towards that goal. We have a petition that Tara's put in the link that if you would think about what your faith community might be able to do and sign up, we will do all the work we can to get you the right resources to make that happen, whether it's an education table. We hope to have videos that you can share. We also are inspired by the way both statewide and nationwide faith communities are taking the lead in this. So this week, there is a conference, Faiths for Vaccines, and you're all welcome to join that if you have a special interest in this. We will be there and we will bring back what we learn and what we can share with Washington State faith communities. If you want to talk more about that or brainstorm together, please contact us at fan@fanwa.org in the next couple weeks, and we'll be happy to help you. There have been times in our history as FAN that we've had gun Sabbath weekends or other kinds of focused weekends. So I'm just inviting you to think of June as the time to do that. Thanks, and I'll look in the chat if there are questions. And we are almost ready to do breakout groups. So let's talk a little bit about that. Tara will be setting up 8 groups that we have a facilitator in each who will lead us through the process. The most important thing is what we take away from you today. We talk to our program committee about, we review it together, we talk with our board about, we work in conjunction with the 25 to 30 coalitions that we work with to raise up what's on the hearts of the faith community. What would they like to see in terms of change? Of course, not everything makes it to the top, right? But it certainly informs how we move forward in the year ahead. So we have several breakout groups already pre-selected. If you've been thinking of something you want to gather people around, now's the time to say it in the chat. And you would be then responsible for facilitating that. And I think Tara's made some blank rooms that we'll assign, but let us know. Please make sure that there is somebody taking notes, whether, you know, if you think you're better if you're taking notes, please be the person that takes notes for your group. And towards the end, the facilitator will move you towards choosing 1 to 3 priorities for FAN. And back when we were in person, we would all line up in front of the room and grab the mic and say what your group's priorities were. This time, we'll have a report back here on Zoom, but we also ask that the note taker, please send those notes to fan@fanwa.org so we can put them all together. The beauty about this gathering today, excuse me, is that we get to hear from people across the state. So we're not just talking about housing or homelessness in your region. We're talking about what does it look like on the west side? What does it look like in Central Washington or Southwest or Spokane? So Tara will first assign the facilitators. You should be able to see a choice of groups now. And if you don't, we will need to assign you. Welcome back, I think. Everybody's coming back. Hope that time just goes by so quickly for those of us who have so many people in our room, and maybe slower for just the 1 or 2 of us in a room. But Tara is going to lead us through the report back.
Sure. So I guess we can just have whoever would like to bounce in from their group, and I'll try to keep track of who we've heard from and who we're missing. So if someone would like to kick us off with your top priorities from you and tell us which group you're from.
I don't think I'll have much time to give a whole.
And if you're not speaking, mute yourself because we got a couple of cross conversations going.
Okay, so I will report on the nutrition and Tana, and we mostly talked about how it's really powerful when you can supply some information to people when you're helping them with nutrition things. And I've been working with the master gardeners to build community gardens, and that's really a win-win all around, because people get fresh food and they get to be together, and so good deal. So thank you.
Nice and simple. Who is next?
I think I'll go next. Diane. Mickey and Alice and I and Elise. We had a kind of a small group, but very experienced folks. So Mickey and Alice have been involved in the Tri-Cities in some really important work with the Tri-Cities Immigrant, and I always forget, Immigrant Coalition. And out of that, and as well as some other experiences that I've had more in the Seattle area, we came up with the fact that there have been some great progress made through legislation like Keep Washington Working and Courts Open to All, and some legislation this session as well. However, the immigrant community members in our state, and to varying degrees depending on where in the state and what resources are available to them, are still struggling with having access to the resources to be able to navigate the legal system and the various institutions that they need to navigate in order to be safe and to have what they need to live and to take care of their families, etc. So one thing that we came up with was that it would be important to have more basic training for volunteers that are involved in the work of helping to coordinate the connection between community members and the resources that they are in need of, and especially to help to provide for more access to legal resources and perhaps coordinate public defenders being available and language, coordinating with the language needs of community members. That there's a great need there. There's a lot that's been done, but there's a lot more that needs to happen.
Diane, who would like to go next?
I can go.
All right.
I'm Susan Morgenstern, and I was in the racial equity group, and our 3 priorities were and action steps are to focus on continued education regarding teaching and promoting dialogue about systemic racism and ingrained bigotry, and to supply tools for making this happen. And to make second, to make sure there are laws that require racial equity curriculum for students and not just for staff and educators within the educational system. And also to follow up on implementation of racial equity bills, and also discern whether any additions are needed. One example was, are there any racial equity bills regarding the Asian community? So.
Awesome, thank you. Next.
I'm John Patrick, or go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, John.
Okay, if you want me to. I'm John Patrick, and I'm reporting on the economic justice. Anyway, we really went through fast. This is a fast group. We covered ways to make things more equitable in our state, and Steve, our leader, made a kind of an overview of how we want to go about things with possible income tax, wealth tax, eviction, prevention, and agricultural and worker protections for the betterment of those people in poverty. Then we talked about nationally, we got the American Rescue Plan, the American Farm Family Plan, the American Jobs Plan. Then we just kind of skimmed over a couple more, national wealth tax, and anyway, and then a basic income tax. Then Jane reported on some of the groups going on in our state. The Republicans and Democrats are actually meeting, which I found very good. That's very good that we're actually civilly meeting on breakout. Well, they're like breakout groups with the Senate and House, and they're talking about alternatives within the state, alternatives other than the current taxing system. She talks about 6 or 7 different tax reforms. We didn't go into specifics, but that's promising. And these groups are meeting a couple of times of the year. Let's see, John brought up a very interesting thing that I've never heard of, and that John Otto talked about the state bank that somehow it'd be set up, and Jane talked about, well, they call that public financial cooperatives, where they would figure out, who would get a loan or money. We didn't go into specifics on that, but it's a possibility of what we want to be talking about the rest of the year. And then we covered a little bit about eviction moratorium. And then I said, well, Steve asked what else was on your mind. I said, well, how about the state income tax? So anyway, so we got that going. And then Steve, right at the end, brought up that we need to contact those people, whoever they are. And if you're interested in delving into this income tax thing, I forget who that was. I didn't take good notes on that. But anyway, a lot going on there.
Sounds like a good range of topics. Victoria, are you gonna be next?
Yeah, I have the report back for the housing and homelessness group. So the 3 priorities we discussed, as Sally put in the chat, is that we talked about, instead of doing rent control, but rent regulation. So whether that be like what she put in the chat, the 5% increase. And then we also talked about the boosting and funding for support services and alternative housing forms. And then also lastly, just the zoning regulations and changing with that.
We'll have criminal justice, healthcare, and environment.
How about criminal justice?
Rick Cron, are you there?
Tell Dorothy she's on muted.
Yeah, it looks like you're talking, Dorothy, but we can't hear you.
Okay, I'm Rick Cron. Paul facilitated our group on criminal justice and police reform. We had Dorothy, who's with me, and Mary and Priscilla and Terry. And in terms of criminal justice, the things that came up were concerns about the 3-strike legislation. We felt that that's excessively punitive and it's not evenly applied. I think minorities and disadvantaged people are more affected by this, and that needs work to change that so there's more review and consideration for the type of offenses before the 3-strike rule is applied. In terms of police reform, I think I said that I felt that we're slowly making progress with changing the way policing is done in our state, but it's going to take time. That represented one viewpoint. Priscilla felt very strongly that demilitarization of the police needs to happen now, and that although we're glad to see the passage of the legislation that has some real strong language under Section 5 about restricting the type of equipment and weaponry that the police can acquire and have, that we think that we really need to make sure that that law is enforced, and that they don't just come up with some workarounds. We feel that at least a share of the money that currently goes to policing should be spent on alternatives to what is known as conventional policing, and those would be funding community safety and mental health. And then another important thing would be to eliminate the cash bail. Those were our main talking points, and probably like most groups, we could have kept going if we had more time. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Can we hear from healthcare?
Yes, hello there. This is Paul Oldenkamp, facilitated the healthcare and mental health group. Sort of our level of priorities kind of had the issue of the universal healthcare system for Washington State as kind of a thing that interacted with a number of more detailed areas, and looking at a moving towards a universal healthcare system could address some of the other issues we saw. And one of those was the need for improved mental health services in Washington State and better funding for those. And we've learned more about the need for that just with the effects of the pandemic here just lately on that. And then also kind of concerning mental health services, there was a concern about having broader and more variety of services that could be used to address particular situations, not tailoring or restricting the provision of mental health services to just a single, presumably lowest cost way to address the problem. So we need more variety and more continuity of care, flexibility for providers there. And then the third area had to do with equity in healthcare. And there was a couple nuances here. One was the provision of healthcare for undocumented people and the restrictions against undocumented people getting health services is a matter of inequality. And then another thing we've learned here with the pandemic is that there's a lot of issue with inequitable healthcare services for people in different racial, ethnic, and economic groups. And we've learned more about that that should be better addressed. Thank you.
Right, and then environment.
Hi, it's Kathy Dawson. I was the facilitator, and I forgot to ask my reporter to be the reporter, so I'm going to report. We had a conversation, each of us contributing concerns, came up with a list of 10. In the process of winnowing those down to 3, we decided that 3 of them were really duplicates of others, so 7 came down to 3. And they were the use of natural gas in buildings, new and retrofit, and actually the concern that we stop calling it natural anything and call it methane, but bringing back the Clean Buildings Act, bringing labor into the conversation and making sure it gets through next time. Second was to undo Governor Inslee's line item veto of tribal consultation on the climate bill. We're concerned about their equal rights to travel to traditional sites for herbs and things, and their sacred sites that energy installations could disturb. And the third one was concern for just transition, and that be defined not just for those in fossil fuel industry jobs and frontline communities, but anyone and everyone who has been or would be left out in the new economy. So, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Did I miss anyone? All right, I think we can move on. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope that was enough time, and maybe one group had a small group, so maybe that was too much time for you. So I guess whoever wants to pop in and share your top 3 issue topics, and then we'll just popcorn around.
I was in the housing group, We didn't really have time to come up. We had great things that people were sharing, and 30 minutes was not enough time, even though we had a perfect size group. But if I'm going to just pull out on behalf of the group the three things, because I know that's our assignment. One that came up is efforts that are currently underway by the statewide housing coalition. This was Joanne in Spokane told us about, and this has to do with outlawing landlords from using a past criminal record because that's such a barrier for people getting housing. The issue of inadequate funding for case management was brought up, and then just, of course, the lack of housing. The desperate need for more permanent housing, because everything short of permanent housing, the temporary fixes, that then people are stuck in temporary fixes because there is no place for them to go.
Great, short and sweet. Who would like to go next? So I see Kathy, but I'm guessing that's not that's your wife's name. Oh, no.
Linda Gaines is going to report for the hunger in TANF. Oh, unmute yourself, Linda. Good.
Okay, well, I'm not sure that we, just one thing or three things? I'm just a little confused.
Yeah, your top three things that were discussed.
Well, we talked a lot about food distribution for people in poverty. That maybe the food is there, but the people are not living where they're able to have access to healthy food that keeps them in good nutrition. And then we also talked about food for school-age children, and the fact that there are some programs already that provide food, like the breakfast after the bell and some things like that we've worked on in the past, but it needs to be more opportunity, and especially in these times when there was no school in the school building, food especially to children, but to maybe all people in poverty, and and community gardens, and so getting we pretty much focused on getting food to I'll say those are the three.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Linda.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Kathy Klein.
Okay, I was in the economic justice taxation group, and there is a tax structure working group in the legislature, and they've come out with a preliminary report. So our number one is to keep in touch with that working group. They're going to have hearings throughout the state for public input on that report. And then a reduction in sales tax, because it's too high and is really hurting people who need the money to live on. And then the fact that economic justice really affects all other areas of justice, because we need to produce the revenues that can fund some of the other programs that are needed to create a better justice system, so that criminal justice, environmental justice, educational justice, all of that needs to have funding. And so we need to fix our tax code so that the funding is available.
Okay, awesome. We still have criminal justice, racial equity, and healthcare.
I'll go for criminal justice. So we had a good session on making some headway around police reform. There are 3 bills that will come up at the next session, I think in January, that are on the table and will be helpful. House Bill 1507 for independent prosecutor at a higher level than the county prosecutor. House Bill 1202, qualified immunity, so that people who have been wronged by officers can sue the officer and or the department better. And House Bill 1402 to help deburden people coming out of the criminal system from debt. And then some other subjects real quick that, you know, having more mental health integrated in 911 calls so that police are not brought out to places where they shouldn't be. And mental health and social workers are brought out instead, or people well trained instead of police. And also, are there ways that we can get the police, you know, the kind of people who are doing traffic stops for a broken taillight or something, not be armed, or some kind of way of splitting things so that, you know, I don't like the term defund the police, but splitting it up in such a way that not everybody is armed.
Okay, great. Let's see. Oh, sorry, we also have climate. So environment, climate, racial equity, or healthcare, mental health.
Hi there, I'll talk about healthcare, mental health. This is Paul Oldenkamp. I facilitated the group there. My wife Nancy took the notes there, and I didn't delegate reporting to anyone. Forgot to do that. So our discussion was heavily weighted on in the area of mental health, and the 3 areas that I guess I would summarize for this on it is that the mental health system in Washington State has inadequate resources, too few inpatient beds and clinics available to meet the need. Related to that is that there are also too few practitioners. Not enough psychiatrists are practicing in Washington State, or we're at a very low level relative to other states and so on. And kind of connected with that was a suggestion that we also need to make better use of nurse practitioners and physician assistants in situations where a lower maybe level of skills than a physician being necessary to help deal with it there. The third area people brought up was related to what we just heard about the police reform area, that we need to separate out responses to mental health emergencies from a police response to a mental health practitioner response. And we don't know if you'd want to call this a police reform issue or a healthcare reform issue, but it certainly involves both areas. Thank you.
I see in the chat that Andrea will speak to immigration.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So in our group, we talked about one of the priorities being an increase of special immigration visas for Afghanis who have helped our government, and for ensuring a higher refugee cap. And many people shared about their experiences supporting sanctuary work of churches and folks in sanctuary like Jose Robles, as well as having, individual experiences where they've seen close up the harm that our immigration system has done to our community members. And one of the ways that FAN has also taken action is by endorsing the Roadmap to Freedom. And I believe MAPSAMEN has, as well as the Church Council of Greater Seattle. And I'm part of the Jewish Coalition for Immigrant Justice Northwest, and we're actually doing an event that I'm happy to invite you to on Tuesday night to learn more about it. But the Roadmap to Freedom was introduced by Congresswoman Jayapal in January with a large coalition of folks that are basically laying out what a vision would look like for a just and humane immigration system. We've been in such a reactionary mode for the past 4 years. And so now is really an opportunity to take action. And one of those priorities is to create a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million undocumented community members in our country. And, you know, FAN has taken action in the state legislative session to end, you know, the contract with the GEO group to close the detention center in Tacoma. And so we are taking action in our state, and there's more we can do there, as well as in overhauling our immigration system more broadly. Yeah, so I'd love to continue the discussion, and there also will be opportunities to potentially meet with our state senators and do more advocacy to try to make this happen through budget reconciliation, through potentially the filibuster, whatever means necessary. Thanks.
Jean Mendoza for Environment.
Jean, you're muted.
Thank you. We unanimously agreed that salmon and clean water need to be part of our environmental platform. Salmon is who we are, and salmon covers the whole state. Salmon need clean water, so the two are intertwined. So that was our #1 choice. We also selected healthy homes and clean buildings. The reason we selected that is because in order to achieve healthy homes and clean buildings, it takes regulatory action. So it will take a lot of work to convince the policymakers and the lawmakers to take this step, but it's a very important thing to improve our environment. Our third issue is a large issue, climate change. And there are so many things that fall under climate change. We need to end fossil fuels. We need to address the water supply. The aquifers in Eastern Washington are dropping drastically. We need to address wildfires. They're not going away, and they have a big impact on climate change. We need to look at clean fuels and clean cars. And finally, we had a discussion about where FAN fits in with environmental activism, and how does FAN interact with other environmental groups. So there were several people in our group who are members of 350.org or Sierra Club. The question came up, how does FAN interact? We understand that there are about 25 environmental groups in Washington state that come together on issues. And in our opinion, FAN has a very valuable role here. We bring together a perspective from faith communities, a wide range of faith communities from across the state. And in a certain sense, FAN can take the temperature of how people out in the communities perceive environmental issues. So that is our message, that FAN probably is and should continue to interact with the other environmental groups and bring people together so that as a group, all these 25 groups can interact together and achieve our goals. Any questions?
I think we're just missing racial equity, unless others have been skipped.
I can report for racial equity. Okay, so our first question that came up was whether racial equity or racial justice can even be legislated. So that led into a lot of discussion about how we need to do our own anti-racism work within ourselves, within our faith communities, within our outward communities, and all the work that has been done this past year and needs to continue to be done. But we talked about how you can't wait for that work to be finished before you actually start taking action. They need to happen at the same time. So the issues that we thought were the most important to work toward racial equity were reparations, protecting voting rights, because the more everyone's voices heard, the more we're equally represented. Represented. And then another one that we thought was really important to address was mass incarceration and the racial disparities in the criminal justice system.
Okay, did we get everyone? I think so. All right, turn it back to Elise.
Thank you, everybody. My takeaway is there are overlaps in each of those categories, and each area of interest affects the other, and racial equity is embedded in all. So thank you for that conversation. Please send your notes to fan@fanwa.org. Do I sound like a telethon? fan@fanwa.org. So we can have all 10 of your items, Kathy, in addition to the 3 you lifted up. So now I'd like to turn it over to our board chair, Carol Jensen, to close us out. And we'll also have time for last minute announcements in between that. You can put them in the chat, or we hope that there will be time in Carol's remarks. Carol?
Yeah, thank you, Elise, and good to be with everybody. On June 11th, 2011, almost 10 years ago, it was, for those of us in the Christian tradition, it was the day before Pentecost. FAN was born. And so we are so excited to be celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. We've come a really long ways in our organization, and we are excited for the next 10 years also. Also, this year is a huge transition for FAN. I think most all of you know that, of course, Paul Benz is still with us now, but he is retiring at the end of this year, the end of 2021. And this is going to be a year of saying goodbye to him, not yet, but soon, and also to celebrating his amazing work as our founding co-director, and then before that, with the birth of FAN, the Lutheran Public Policy Office, he was the staff for that as well. So there'll be a lot to thank him for, and we hope that you have put the annual dinner, or I don't know if we've even announced it yet, but yes, there it is, the slide, all ready to go. Sunday, November 14th, it will be a special celebration for Paul, and also, of course, all the work of this year, this amazing legislative year that we've had. By then, we hope that we will also have a new staff person to coordinate our public policy work. It's going to be a little different than Paul's job, which probably nobody else could do anyway. And Paul has served both as co-director and as FAN's chief lobbyist, and we now are going to be transitioning to having an executive director, and that person will be Elise DeGoyer, who will be starting that position the 1st of January after Paul leaves, and so we are delighted that she's continuing with us in that role. And the new, we're going to call this new job the really the policy coordinator, the director of something like that. What policy? What are we calling it? Yeah, they will coordinate FAN's public policy, and we see this position as also a slight shift for FAN, that part of this person's job will be widening the network of people that are leading FAN's policy work. And you'll be able to find out more about what we mean by that. But the network of people not only responding to FAN, but the FAN emails, but of leading our policy work. So you can stay tuned through the weekly emails to developments. We'll let people know when the job description is ready, which we anticipate certainly in the next month and a half. We hope to have that job description ready. So it's an exciting year for FAN, and we are so grateful for your partnership and your support. Thanks very much.
Any other burning announcements that you haven't had a chance to share? Let's do it now. Just go ahead and unmute if you'd like to make a short announcement.
Yes, sorry, I was looking. I wanted to invite everyone. Bend the Arc Jewish Action in Seattle is putting on a program on May 25th from 6 to 7 that's focusing on the police accountability campaign and the strategy and the successes. We're honored to feature 3 of the leaders of the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability, and everyone is welcome. It's a virtual, it's a Zoom program, and we think it'll be very informative. It was a really amazing accomplishment vis-a-vis those bills that Paul went through already earlier. And I can put a link in the chat of a URL where you can go to read more and sign up.
Any others? I have one. We have another summit coming up June 6th. So anyone else in your community whose voice you want to lift up, please encourage them to register. We usually do 4 summits. Because we're virtual, we could gather in these 2 and gather across the state, which I love hearing from and seeing everybody from across the state.
Our vaccine slides, I'm not sure if we covered the Faith for Vaccine Summit. I missed that slide, so if you want to share more about that, Elise.
It's right there for you. It's May 26th, and that's this week. Sorry, is that Thursday or Wednesday?
Wednesday.
Wednesday, thank you. Wednesday, the 26th. And it's 10 o'clock our time, right? That's Eastern time, but some really great national luminaries will be part of it. And again, just all part of this saying faith communities have much to say about getting vaccines out as broadly. It's kind of like the census work we did last year, everyone. It's like we wanted everyone counted, and now we want everyone vaccinated who is able. So so with that, June 6th, and Carol, did you have a final benediction words, or do we just say thank you and until next time?
Yes, I did not prepare that, but I would just say, yeah, continue the good work and stay connected to FAN, to each other, yeah, it's a long road, but we've done a lot this year.
Yes. Yasher Koach.
Had the
thank you
music cue to be celebrate. So thank you so much for your engagement and your advocacy.
Yes. Thank you.